Jim Buddha Martin. He was given that nickname after he gave George W. a job when George W. was 22 years old, and they were fast friends, and George W. probably gave him something, a nickname, Buddha. So Jim Buddha Martin is the father of 7 children, 15 grandchildren, married to Mary Lou. They live in Arlington, Virginia. He's the president and founder of 60 Plus organization, which many of us belong to, and all of us should belong to, who are over 60. He's trying to combat the AARP, okay? And by the way, George W. said he gave him that name Buddha because he had a fuller figure back then. Around here, we call that the Governor Huckabee syndrome. But anyway, he's a former Marine, and he has murder on his mind. He's trying to kill the death tax. And he's driven to do that, and we all hope he succeeds, and I frankly hope he becomes a serial killer. Okay, to kill everything that starts with T and spells taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Buddha Martin. Okay, come on up, Jim.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And yes, he called me Buddha. He said I enlightened him somewhat, but also because I was a little fuller in those days. But as he also said in that same video at our dinner 2 years ago, he said Jim also swims a mile a day, which I do, plays senior citizen basketball with one of our stars. And so that's how I stay active, and obviously with 7 children and 15 grandchildren. And a 16th is on the way any day now. Tonight has been a long time in the making. We worked real hard to make this happen, to have this fellow here tonight. I remember right after Stu Epperson took over CNP, he said, Jim, we want to honor Pat Boone. So I'm often asked, how did the 60 Plus Association, which I formed to counter the AARP, how were we able to get this world-renowned celebrity to be our spokesman? Well, unlike the AARP, which lives on our tax dollars, we live on voluntary donations. And I discovered that Pat Boone was a financial supporter of ours through the years. So when I got up enough nerve to call him and ask him to be our spokesman, Pat said, well, Jim, let me tell you this. I love the way you expose the AARP for their liberal shenanigans, if you will, and also I know you're working to abolish the death tax. So, it's nice when you can tell your future donors that we don't, most entertainers, you pay them to get an endorsement. We don't. Pat donates to us. And that's great because he's a true believer. And then he said, and Jim, now that I admit I am 60 plus, I accept your offer. So I got to tell you, folks, it's my high honor to introduce tonight's honoree. And with that, let me start here by saying this. You've all heard of the TV show American Idol? Well, tonight's honoree is clearly the original American Idol, if you will. Why do I say that? Because he was on both the Arthur Godfrey Talent Show and the Ted Mack Amateur Hour. And he won both of those, not one, but both of them. And in my opinion, though, his illustrious career recently took a back seat to his and Shirley's 60th wedding anniversary. 60. Living in Hollywood, where unfortunately marriages are sometimes measured by the month, that's quite an accomplishment, Pat. And also in Hollywood, your career, if you're talented enough, lands you a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Pat Boone does not have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Pat Boone has 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. for music, movies, and TV. And speaking of TV, I want to share a story with you that highlights Pat and Shirley Boone's Christian and family upbringing and sticking to the principles that you've always lived by. After winning both the Godfrey and Mac shows, sponsors came to Pat. He was 21. The ad agency told Pat that a Virginia company wanted to sponsor his TV show. Asked their product. Pat asked them. They told him it was cigarettes, tobacco. Pat said, no, I don't smoke, don't want to do that. So the agency came back a second time from a St. Louis, Missouri firm, Anheuser-Busch. And no, I'm not making that up, because Pat then asked him, what's their product? Told it was beer. No, he again firmly declined. And though he was severely admonished at that time, Pat, you and Shirley, you're still in college, 2 kids, more on the way. You literally don't have 2 nickels to rub together. But Pat Boone stuck by his guns. Well, when the ad folks came back a third time, they held their breath and they asked him, Pat, do you have anything against Chevrolet automobiles? That became, of course, the #1 TV show in the country for a number of years. Now, I want to acknowledge somebody without whose help I could not be doing this. My successor as president of the 60 Plus Association, Amy Frederick, just stand up real quickly and say hi to everybody. And now we're going to show you a video for a few Pat Boone highlights, and Ronald Reagan is in this video too, if you don't mind. So hit it. Maestro.
Since this is a night to offer awards and encouragement, I'd like to pass along some honors myself. Pat Boone, most of the world knows you as an entertainer or a movie star, but we who call you friend know that you have given most of your life to others.
Pat Boone, one of our great stars, right? As a daytime show, marvelous. The way he comes out, hi, I'm Pat Boone. What do you want, a cookie?
Let me just say, April Love, White Shoes, and 50 million albums sold.
9th biggest selling singles artist of all time. The one, the only, Pat Boone!
Things politically, we're trying to get Christians to vote. Please, Christians, do your civic and your Christian duty. We need to elect responsible leaders who will not take God's name off everything.
Hey family, thank you so much for stopping by. Robert Stearns here with Eagles Wings. Really happy that you've joined us today, and I pray and believe that you're having a blessed day in every way. I am privileged to be standing here with American entertainment royalty, absolutely a part of the American landscape, Pat and Shirley Boone. God bless you both.
Well, he has and he does, and we expect him to continue.
Absolutely.
Our favorite senior is our spokesman at the 60 Plus Association. You may have heard of him, legendary singer Pat Boone.
Christ, our Savior. Amen.
He's our leader. He's our secret weapon in campaigns. Pat, are you here? Please come on up. Pat Boone.
I am thrilled to see all of you people here.
I'm going to call on a couple of members real quickly. Joe Wilson.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, what an honor, ladies and gentlemen, to be here with Pat Boone. We know what he does for 60 Plus, what he does for our country, but as a veteran myself, my wife Roxanne is here. We have 4 sons currently serving in the military. You need to know that a hero of the military truly is Pat Boone. He has been such a promoter of veterans, service members, military families. So Mr. Boone, thank you. God bless you for what you do for our military.
Randy Forbes from Virginia.
Thank you, Jim. And in 2001, I was in a special election. If it hadn't been for Jim Martin, 60 Plus, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. So, Jim, thank you for your great work.
I love the Pledge of Allegiance of nation under God. If you don't like it, brother, then you're free to leave, by God. 'Cause I am an American. My blood's red, white, and blue.
Now this
is a moment I will, of course, never forget. I checked in the hotel. I had a concert that night, and the Secret Service met me at the desk. Said the president's in the hotel, and he wants you to come up and have an early dinner with him before you go to your concert. Well, of course I did, and I went up, and I thought there'd be a lot of local political figures and all kinds of folks, and I go in the presidential suite, and there's nobody, and I'm ushered around to the dining room of the suite, and there's the president and Chuck Heston. And the three of us sat down and had an early dinner, just the three of us. And I thought they wanted to talk politics. I wanted to get behind the scenes stuff. He didn't want to talk about politics. They talked about their movie careers. The two of them. But that's the kind of man he was. And now this is him signing something that is part of our national calendar. Every year, the National Day of Prayer had to begin in one house of Congress or the other, work its way through, and finally up to the president, who would sign it. And we suggested to Ronald Reagan that he just make it a perpetual part of the calendar. So we're going to have to start from scratch every year. And he thought it was a great idea. So there's Vonette Bright, the wife of Bill Bright of Campus Crusade, and me, and a rabbi, and some Christian and religious leaders, and Ronald Reagan. The way he holds that pen, very distinctive, but signing into national perpetual law on our calendar, the first Thursday of May, every year, the National Day of Prayer. That's the kind of guy. Don't you wish we had another Reagan today?
They moved it after that from that first Thursday to just Thursday of the night, from May to February.
Pat, would you and Tony join me on the stage? Tony Perkins, Vice President of CNP and President of Family Research Council. Would you join me on stage? That's great. Good. Thank you. It's our honor to make a presentation, and you saw, would you please be seated? You saw a lot on the film, and it's great, and it's all true, but there's more starting in the 50s. After Pat graduated from Columbia University, magna cum laude, he wanted to be a teacher. He went on the talent show, and then suddenly he started putting records. He got a record contract out of that, and he started putting out records, and that was in the mid-50s, and that was when the greatest single era of music began in American history. I've got a lot of some people here who would agree with me, wouldn't you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And this was the guy that was making it happen, and these were good lyrics. Safe for the whole family, as they say, and Pat Boone was a great influence in that era. A philosopher said, you take the writings and the speeches and the education, give me the music, and I'll take the culture. Yeah. I'll change the culture. And Pat, you led a great era, and we're very appreciative for it. And he sold 46 million records. That's a lot, man. And that was great. And he set the pace for the other people who came along. And I got to tell you, I was a disc jockey back then, and it was absolutely tremendous what he was doing. He was known as the guy who was pure and clean, okay? And because of your influence through the years in movies and in writing and speech making and all kinds of activities, and especially music, the influence you've had on our culture to express American values and to make this country what Ronald Reagan dreamed of it being, a city shining on a hill, we're proudly presenting you with this Ronald Reagan Lifetime Achievement Award. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Pat Boone.
Boy, I'm liking this. Stu, Tim, Jim, everybody, I so greatly appreciate it. I keep flashing back to my earliest days in Nashville, Tennessee, growing up, when I was, as Stu said, going to be a school teacher, preacher. Because in my high school years, when I was president of the student body and I was singing all over Nashville and staying very busy, but I had to think, what am I going to study in college? What kind of a career do I want? And of course, I love singing, but I couldn't see that as real a good bet for a career. And I remember praying upstairs in the attic of our house, a humble house on Lone Oak Road. I had claimed the attic as my room so my brother could have the bed downstairs. I wanted the attic. It was my man cave. We didn't know about man caves then, but it was just an unfinished attic and a cot, and I could look out the window, and I looked up the street around a curve there on Lone Oak Road, and I remember praying that God would direct me and use me in some way that was useful and purposeful to Him and to others. I didn't know what it would be, but I decided that since I was being influenced by Christian teachers and a Christian high school, that would probably be the best way I could count on being able to spend my life. So I started out that way. Now to be here tonight and to be honored by you, an organization that I greatly admire and am grateful for, and to have my name in any way associated with this great man is just beyond anything I ever could have imagined. And I knew that I only had so much time, and I didn't realize that you weren't going to eat till I get through. And so I will try to be as brief as I can. I actually wrote out what I wanted to say to get it in less than the 20 minutes they had allotted to me. Yes, 20 minutes is what they said. But I'll try to do it in less. However, I want to add one little thing. And Jim, I was telling him coming here from the airport how much you had enjoyed Love Letters in the Sand. And he didn't know this, and you may not have either. But Love Letters in the Sand was the B-side of another record. It was on the other side of a song called Bernadine, my first movie title song, and Johnny Mercer, the great songwriter, wrote that. And that was the A side. You had to put something on the other side. And Randy Wood of Dot Records had me record this song, didn't know quite what to do with it. It had been a hit, an airplay hit by Bing Crosby years before, another idol of mine. And so they put it even in the movie. Bernadine had nothing to do with the plot, just a chance, another excuse for me to sing another song. And after Bernadine ran its course on the radio and became a top 10 million-selling hit, the DJs turned it over just to see what was on the other side. And it was Love Letters in the Sand. And as soon as they started playing that, the phones lit up. People wanted to get that record, and it wound up selling almost 5 million copies. And I wish we had known that we had 2 million sellers on one record. We would have put them out separately. But I just wanted you to know that little bit of trivia. You're all looking hungry, but I do want to, with your permission, I'd like to share some memories. And because I tend to, when I'm totally extemporaneous, get too wordy, because there's so much I want to say and could say, but I timed it. I wrote this out so I could try to keep in the time limit. Some memories and some special moments from my friendship with this man, things that most people have never known, real kind of inside stuff, things that make this evening and this honor more special than you might have imagined special to me. First, my wife and I came to know Ron and Nancy Reagan when our kids were in school together. Now, they were 20, 25 years older than Shirley and I, but Ron and Nancy had their kids, Ron Jr. and Patty, at the end, I suppose, of their childbearing capability. They didn't have any more after that. While Shirley and I had really rushed things, having all 4 of our girls on hand already when I graduated from Columbia University at age 23. 4 kids. I was on the cover of TV Guide in my cap and gown because of the Pat Boone Chevy show on ABC. And inside that issue were pictures of Shirley and our 4 little girls. I should have been jailed or neutered, I think, because poor Shirley, we had 4 kids in 3.5 years. And so we got out of town after I graduated, moved to California, bought a fine house where we still live 53 years later, enrolled our little girls in the John Thomas Dye School as they got old enough. And that's where and when we met the Reagans with young Ron and Patty, who were in classes and with several of my daughters. And there were numerous times when, after a lovely and lively function involving our kids, I'd stand with Ron Reagan in front of this big roaring fire in the administration building of the very nice little country school. And I'd hear about his traveling the country delivering what came to be called the speech, underwritten by GE and electrifying audiences with his deep and passionate understanding of what was wrong with our government and what needed to be done to set it right. And I know you remember his famous statement, "Government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem." Well, after many, and boy, is that true. After many chats at school, I would, driving home with the girls, say to Shirley, "You know, that Ronald Reagan, he ought to run for office. He'd make a great congressman, really." I mean, he had already, his TV show had ended on Death Valley Days, sponsored by 20 Mule Team Borax, and he was not making movies anymore. But when he announced he was running for governor of California, I was immediately on board. But I was almost the only one of his entertainment friends who was. There was no John Wayne, there was no Roy Rogers, there were none of the guys, none of his friends in the Rat Pack. There was, because nobody really thought an actor could become governor of California. Eventually, during the campaign, I was joined in his support by Piper Laurie, Wendell Corey, and then old Victor Jory. It was Laurie, Corey, Jory, and Boone. It sounded like a bad law firm. And toward the end, Roy Rogers and Duke Wayne did come aboard at the last, and of course he was not only elected, but in a big way, and he put Pat Brown out of office. And he set about putting his beautifully articulated theories into practice. He turned California around. He defied those rebellious student uprisings on college campuses and generally let folks know there was a professional in charge. And with the help of his kitchen cabinet, a member of that cabinet is here, trained business people, administrators, he demonstrated to the citizens what responsible, practical government could be like. About 3 years into that first term, we shared a dais at a political evening in Palm Springs, and I asked him if governing was what he had expected it to be. He said it was a tough job, but he mostly enjoyed it, and that the hardest part was holding on to his moral guidelines and convictions that so many people and groups had helped elect him, and that some naturally expected him to give them things they wanted in return. And some were things that Reagan himself couldn't conscientiously grant. So he had those dilemmas. And he gave me an example that I'll never forget, and nobody knows about this. He struggled with the issue of abortion. And he knew that in California, the liberal bent favored a very liberal, permissive stance. He said he'd prayed fervently about it, asking God for guidance, and he finally decided that he opposed abortion except in cases of rape and incest, even when an expected child might be deformed in some way. He came into his office in the morning just before he was to meet the press and state his position. His legal aide, Herb Ellingwood, said, "Chief, I want to show you something before you go in there. And he showed Reagan a painting that had come to the office the day before. Reagan told me it wasn't a distinguished or unusual painting. He didn't consider himself an expert anyway, and he asked Herb why he wanted him to see this painting. Herb said, just thought you'd like to know, in light of your decision, that this was painted by a man born with no arms. And quietly the governor told me he felt as if God had placed his hand on his shoulder, as if to assure him he'd made the right call. That was the Ronald Reagan that I knew. Then came a very dramatic moment during his second term. Shirley and I, several Christian ministers, had come to Sacramento to attend a religious rally on a Sunday afternoon, and we were invited to the governor's mansion for a visit before we flew back to L.A. Nancy, of course, the gracious hostess. We had some refreshments, a fun chat with the governor. And then just before we left to catch our planes, a minister asked if we might have a moment of prayer. Well, sure, Reagan said. And we joined hands in a little circle, and in the midst of that prayer, there was a sudden silence, almost awkward. And one of the ministers spoke in a voice we recognized as a prophetic utterance. My son, I am well pleased with you. If you continue to walk uprightly before me, you will dwell at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Another silence, and the prayer concluded. And we all, of course, looked immediately at Reagan. He seemed a little dazed. He said quietly, well, that was something. After that, I was a Reagan delegate, enthusiastic delegate from California at the Republican Convention in Kansas City in 1976, and I knew he was going to be nominated. But instead, the convention nominated Gerald Ford. And the next time around, Reagan would be 70 years old, and it appeared that this prophecy we thought was wrong. And after Ford's campaign, we elected a misguided peanut farmer from Georgia. But 4 years later, 70-year-old Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States. I was in Washington, D.C. election night as the results were coming in, and I saw Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw reluctantly announcing that it looked like Reagan was winning. And I called their home in Pacific Palisades. I had the number still. Ron answered, and he told me that he and Nancy had just settled down to watch the returns. And I asked if I could be the first to address him as Mr. President. He said, well, that may be premature, Pat. And I assured him I had just seen the news announced in D.C., and this is before he had actually heard it. So then I asked him, do you remember that afternoon in Sacramento and the word that came in the middle of that little prayer? He said, I've thought about that many times in the last 2 months. That was something. One more instance. I saw Ronald Reagan do such a courageous thing toward the end of his first term. Still troubled about the whole issue of abortion, he determined to make a final, deeply thought out position paper on the whole subject. He wrote a small book called Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation. He wrote it himself and had it ready for publication. And as Ed Meese may attest, Mike Deaver and others pleaded, Chief, don't do this right now. This is not a wise move regarding the upcoming election. At least wait till after you're elected. Again, Reagan said, well, can you guarantee I'll be elected? I think I need to use the bully pulpit while I have it. And that book was published, and I have it. And again, that was the Ronald Reagan that we know and love. Well, that book inspired me to mount a pro-life campaign of my own that continues to this day. I've written and recorded songs like Let Me Live, the anthem of the unborn child, which was inspired by something in that book when he said kind of rhetorically, it's a shame that the one whose life who is most irrevocably affected on this matter can't be heard from. And that haunted me, and I had what I called a waking vision, hearing first one, then two, then many, then hundreds and thousands of children pleading for their own lives at various stages of their development, and yet not one had yet been born. And I recorded that song with some children from our church, being the voices of the children, asking to be able to walk into the sunlight, feel their father's arms around them, feel their mother's love surround them, be a part of God's creation, let them live. And I have held many babies in my arms since then whose young mothers have intended to have abortions and changed their minds and hearts after hearing that song, which he inspired. Ron Reagan's life and courage inspired my own 40 years of conservative activism, hundreds of columns for WorldNet Daily. Joe Farah is here, has graciously put up with all of my ponderings and meanderings and sometimes controversial columns like President Pinocchio. The President Without a Country, dealing with his description of a country we don't recognize as no longer a Christian nation, perhaps a Muslim nation, and we haven't lived up to our morals. And it occurred to me, maybe like the hero in Edward Everett Hale's great novel, he's talking about some other country, not the one that you and I know and love. And so Joe Farah has given me that platform, and I've also written a lot of columns for Newsmax, so many appearances and speeches for conservative causes. I'm a member of FOA out there in California, Friends of Abe. And of course, I had gotten used to being one of the very few conservatives in the entertainment business, in La La Land, as I called it. But now at our last FOA meeting, there are almost 2,000 members of the entertainment community. That led to another Lifetime Award from CPAC 2 years ago, very unusual for an entertainer, and I know Ronald Reagan would have applauded, and he would have too when Dick Cheney presented me another Lifetime Award from Right to Life, the pro-life champions. He and Nancy welcomed Shirley and me to the White House for 8 years running with our Easter Seals poster child, because I was telethon host for 18 years, helping that wonderful organization raise over $600 million for children with various disabilities, children and adults. And our president then always took pictures with the poster child, usually on crutches or in a wheelchair, and gave presidential jelly beans to him or her, as well as a lot of love. Following his example, I've always looked for ways to utilize my, quote, celebrity in campaigns for conservative candidates and causes. Jim Martin, of course, co-founder and one of my heroes, heroic chairman of 60 Plus, the conservative alternative to AARP, has repeatedly raised huge funds to support candidates in their races. And in the midterm elections of 2010, he enabled me to make 7 million robocalls all over America and TV spots as well. And we helped elect 70 new conservative congresspeople to hold the line for constitutional government. We did that together. Last year, through different auspices, I did several million more calls, and even my suggestion was video emails to seniors, largely Christian, imploring them to register and vote, since research has shown that about half of those eligible do neither. Especially frustrating, since obviously that segment of the republic could win every election if they would just do their constitutional and Christian duty to vote. And I intend to keep pressing that issue as long as I live, because it's more important now than ever. I, too, have written and been making a speech wherever I can. I call it Losing Liberty. And I'm going to sing a song at the end of our program tonight that I'd written in answer to the militant atheist, Michael Newdow, up in Sacramento, who's trying to erase the 2 words under God from our Pledge of Allegiance. He didn't like the fact that his 9-year-old daughter was saying the pledge at school and saying under God, he being an atheist, and he pressed this to the Ninth Circuit Court, the most frequently overturned court in the nation, because of their ridiculous decisions and very, very liberal decisions. And so he was pressing that. I met him on Crossfire, and we had a little debate. And I said to this guy, Michael, what's your problem? Why do you not want 99% of Americans to keep saying the Pledge of Allegiance as we have since 1954? But it's unconstitutional. I said, based on what? He said, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion. I said, yeah, go on. What's the rest of that? You don't want to say it? I'll say it for you. Nor restricting the free exercise thereof. That's the rest of the First Amendment. So, I had written this song, and I'm happy to tell you it went to 15 with a bullet on the Billboard Hot 100 single chart, ironically impeded only by Christmas music that year. And it's called Under God, and I'm going to sing that for you after a while. I would like to read just a few words in conclusion, for which you'll be grateful, I'm sure, from the speech that I've been making whenever I had the opportunity. It's obvious to everybody in this room that our liberties are being taken from us, piece by piece, bit by bit, liberty by liberty, freedom of religion, speech in the press. We're being taxed into oblivion, and this administration has become a de facto dictatorship, determined to scrap the Constitution, which Obama said in the one little bit of his college school record that he's allowed to be seen and known by anybody, that he said he felt the Constitution was a flawed document. And then in his first campaign said, we're going to fundamentally transform America. And he set about to do it. And he wants to meld us into a socialist one-world government. That's the plan. And I attribute this unthinkable tragedy and the momentum that it has gained in his administration to two or really three things: ignorance, flagrant abuse of our freedoms, and apathy. And then, of course, in the speech I go into all three. But then I ask, what can we do? Can lost liberty be regained? And I say emphatically, yes, it can. And I call on every real American to do these four things. First of all, care. Be informed. Inform yourself about our origins, the intentions of our forefathers, and then rededicate yourself and your family to being Americans like Jefferson and Madison and Adams, and openly exhort your neighbors to do the same. Then, act. Get involved in local school boards. Write your representatives and senators, even judges and mayors and governors frequently. Let them know what you think and that you're watching what they do. Perhaps you can do what my neighbor up the street and I did. In 2010, we started the Beverly Hills Tea Party. We've had two big open-air meetings on Sunday afternoons right in front of the big Beverly Hills sign on Santa Monica Boulevard, with 500 or more of our neighbors attending, with rabbis and ministers and blacks and whites and Hispanics, Cuban refugees, and even some elected reps like Bob McEwen, who is here tonight and was our first main speaker. And we are non-threatening. The press didn't say anything negative about us. There were no negative signs or protests. And we were protesting taxation without true representation, just like the original Tea Party. And at the very least, for God's sake and America's future, vote in every election, no matter how inconsequential you may think it is. Countless Americans died to preserve that privilege for us. Don't throw it away as if it had no value to you. And finally, though most importantly, pray. thundering down through the ages, come the unrepealed words of the promise God gave to Solomon. If my people, who are called by my name, and that's still millions of us in America, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. And that's 2 Chronicles 7:14. I was privileged, along with Vonette Bright, Shirley Dobson, and a number of others, including rabbis, various ministers, to be a leader in the group that convinced Ronald Reagan to sign into law. And I didn't know Jim was going to show you a little clip from that day, in perpetuity, the National Day of Prayer. That's the first Thursday of May every year. There is a President's Prayer Breakfast, which is different, but this is the National Day of Prayer, first Thursday of May on our national calendar. But one day a year, of course, is not enough. You and I must pray every day, privately and publicly, that God will restore our liberty, rebuild our national character, and that His will be done on earth and in America as it is in heaven. We need to repent personally, nationally, and cry freedom in His name. For, as the Bible declares, for where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. I thank you folks so much for this unforgettable honor.